Lets it fly. R-I-D-I-C-U-L-O-U-S. Ridiculous.
They're going to have to trade the run for the out. The throw over to third. Ball game.
Wow. The fifth year to try and put it away with an ace. That's a storybook ending.
Hello and welcome back. It's time for episode 34 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. So I recapped the Dodgers World Series win last week. Then there was the Deontay Johnson trade from the Panthers to the Ravens. Finally, we had a Fantasy Football Friday around the injured reserve slot and how to use it. Well, as you might imagine, I have lots of football to get into again this week. Look, I've been a football guy my whole life, and I just can't ditch that for pandering purposes and all these more niche sports, even though I love to cover them. It's always going to have my heart. Football is just, I still believe it's the best team game that's ever been created. The NFL trade deadline did come and go on Tuesday at 4 p.m. this week, and some things happened. I thought the MLB trade deadline this year was tame, and this one was even, I'm going to say, a tad less fun, but there was a couple of moves that could actually play into the Super Bowl hopes of some really good teams. We'll think about those today. Then finally, another NFL head coach got fired, and it wasn't Nick Sirianni with the Eagles or Mike McCarthy with the Cowboys yet. I'm still kind of rooting for both of those guys to be gone by the end of the year, but we'll see. I'll tell you why the guy who did get fired, kind of like Robert Saleh with the Jets, was probably not the issue. So, if I ask you who the two best teams in the NFC are, what's your knee-jerk response? I think that for the first time, literally since the merger, it's Detroit and Washington, and there's not a ton of argument against that. The Lions have famously never played in a Super Bowl, and their last NFL championship before the Super Bowl even existed was in 1957. Dwight Eisenhower was coming into office, and the USSR had just launched the Sputnik satellite. The Commanders last won it in 1992, right? So it's been a while for them as well. And I don't have a great pop culture reference right now for them, unfortunately. Anyway, this is all about the trade deadline and how these two best teams in the NFC got better. I'll actually start with Washington because they got the bigger name out of the deal. Marshawn Lattimore, the corner, came over from the Saints. Trust me, there's going to be a lot more Saints in this episode. Washington gets a 5th rounder from this year, but they give up a 3rd, a 4th, and a 6th rounder, again, also all from this year. Career notes on Marshawn Lattimore: 4 Pro Bowls and a Defensive Rookie of the Year award. He's also only played a full slate of games twice in 8 years. There's a decent bit of risk there, obviously. And more than you would expect, risk that is, for a 28-year-old corner in his prime. He shadows pretty much every number 1 wide receiver, though. Famously, he has all those awesome battles with Mike Evans in Tampa Bay. Kind of sad that we won't be seeing those twice a year now, but both of those guys have been ejected before, and they've gotten in fights and gotten the unsportsmanlike conducts. Now he heads to Washington. Washington's already ranked 5th in fewest passing yards allowed, which probably nobody would have predicted coming into this year, and they're 14th in total yards, so the need wasn't massive per se, but every single team in the league, I always think, could use more corners. The trade grade on this, I'm a little bit torn here. I'm thinking B for Washington. If they had a massive need at corner, let's say one of their top 2 guys had just gone down, then sure, I'd be willing to call it an A. For New Orleans, I think they actually got a very good haul for a guy that's, 28 years old with the injury concerns we mentioned. I'm going to say A- for the Saints. And speaking of needs, the Lions had a way more obvious need. The entire league, and everybody that watches football, has talked at length about Aiden Hutchinson and the fractured tibia and fibula, right? I still want to believe that talk that if the Lions make it all the way to the Super Bowl, that Aiden Hutchinson could actually return and play in that game. I don't know. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, but that would be amazing. The Lions pass rush needed help badly, and they chose to target Zadarius Smith from the Browns. There was other guys that they were also reportedly looking at. Chase Young from the Saints was another guy that they were linked to, but let's talk about Zadarius Smith and the deal that they got. The terms: Smith and a 7th-round pick from 2026 to Detroit, a 5th-round pick this year, and a 6th-round pick for next year to Cleveland. People still have no clue how to act with their draft picks, right? All these GMs making these crazy trades and who is worth what, you know what I mean? As always, you got to consider the player that they're getting on the field, not just on paper, though. Zadarius Smith is a 32-year-old edge rusher. He'll almost certainly be the hand-in-the-dirt defensive end, right? The Lions really are not going to use him in all likelihood at linebacker, though he's done some stand-up linebacker stuff, especially with Minnesota in kind of the middle of his career. He's got 65 career sacks and 3 Pro Bowls. He's not a superstar edge rusher, right? Those are the Max Crosbys. Those are the Joey and Nick Bosas and Khalil Macks of the world. He's not that, but super, super reliable. Will it be the one move to take them to and even through the Super Bowl? I have no idea, just like all of these stories and free agent signings and things we speculate on, right? But it looks like the best thing that the Lions could have done. Very obvious need, very obvious fit. So I don't always talk about the film when evaluating a player, but let's just dip into that a little bit. Smith's always been a better player rushing the quarterback than he is against the run, but he also weighs somewhere in the neighborhood of 270 to 280, so I think he can hold up just fine. The only thing you really can't ask him to do is cover anybody. I said this before, and I'll say it again. If you only really identify one big hole on your team and you fill it with one of the best guys available, then you get an A grade. This was probably the best guy available for a very reasonable price, and all of the other star edge rushers stayed put. Nobody else got traded just because those asking prices were too high. The grade for Cleveland, gosh, I'm thinking somewhere in the neighborhood of C to C minus. The fact that they're going to lose their edge rushing tandem that they had with Smith and Myles Garrett, I got to think that this one hurts, and 5th and 6th round picks aren't huge difference makers. I'm going to say a C for Cleveland at best. There were a handful of other trades, roughly a dozen at the deadline, but I don't know that any others really caught my eye like these two. Also, no Fantasy Football Friday today, at least not in any formal sense, because there's just a bunch of other things I'd like to do. But I will make one quick note here. The Bucs tight end, Cade Otton, is right in the middle of one of the greatest fantasy breakouts truly I've ever seen. If there's any chance you can trade for him or still get him off waivers this week, this will be the last week for it, guaranteed. Just do it and don't ask questions. So I'd given a list of the coaches on the hot seat around the beginning of last month. None of them has gotten the boot yet, but one guy I didn't have on the list did. I'm guessing he's the only coach ever to be fired twice and to have the same starting quarterback each time on different teams. If that's happened before, then sue me, but Dennis Allen of the Saints will now forever hold a vendetta against Derek Carr. Carr was the Raiders starter the first time he was fired. It was actually a decade ago, back in 2014. Now, he's 52 years old, and just like Robert Saleh, he will have more opportunities to coach in the league, but he would also probably be better off going back to a defensive coordinator role. That's something that he did just fine earlier on in his career. You don't have to ask where it all went wrong this time. Not with these New Orleans Saints. No team should lose 7 NFL games in a row pretty much ever. Just by random chance, I think enough plays should go your way for that to not happen. The Saints just lost to the Carolina Panthers on Sunday, though, and those teams now have the same record. That alone will cost you a job. Derek Carr has to be one of the most bizarre, kind of enigmatic quarterbacks in the league, too, because he set a record in that game. He's the first quarterback ever to lose to 31 other NFL teams. How that never happened to somebody like a Brett Favre or Phillip Rivers or a Drew Brees, Matt Ryan, I will never know. But indeed, it is the 33-year-old Derek Carr's record to hold. He has 40,000 passing yards, 251 touchdowns to 111 interceptions, completes right around 2/3 of his passes for his whole career. All of the losses can't be on him, right? But one issue that a ton of people have criticized him on is throwing hospital passes. If you've never heard the term, then I'm kind of happy I get to use it here on the podcast for the first time. A hospital pass is one thrown in a spot where, in order to catch it, a receiver's kind of put in position to take a huge hit that leads him into that contact, and a lot of times that's in the head. What it typically looks like on the field is a throw up the seam, a bit above the guy's head, and in front of a safety that's coming downhill. You don't want to be known as the guy that throws these. Let me be very clear. Carr just got his number one receiver, Chris Olave, rocked and concussed on a hospital pass in the Panthers game. Olave is a great player, but he's now got 5 documented concussions. He's almost in that spot where Tua was a couple of weeks ago, where he really has to ask himself how much football means to him. How much more does he want to keep doing this? I'm guessing it's about arm slot or release point, maybe just trying to throw balls a little bit too hard when he has some opportunity to put touch on him, but I don't know. I'm no quarterback guru, and I'm always the first one to say that. Other issues with the Saints, like most years, are pretty much all down to injuries. Tight end, offensive line, receiver, those have all been revolving doors, and you hardly know who's going to line up there week to week. That's just not how you move the ball or score any points. Derek Carr himself missed 3 games with an oblique injury right as the season kind of started slipping away. It was the perfect storm to get a coach fired. Dennis Allen, just like Robert Saleh, should take some time off, plan some vacations with his family and whatnot, and then probably start thinking to next year for finding a defensive coordinator role. The Saints are still only 7 weeks removed from one of the best starts in NFL history, scoring 40-plus points in those first 2 weeks. How dramatically things change when everybody starts dropping like flies. So I said I was pretty much done with baseball for the year, right? At least until the big-name free agents and their markets kind of started heating up in the winter. I'm going to skim through all this, and we'll go a little bit briefer here, but I think it's actually going to take a lot longer than anybody thought for something dramatic to happen. Let's talk about Juan Soto and the Yankees, of course. He's got the super agent Scott Boras on his side. This guy has negotiated billions in contracts for all of his huge athletes. And Soto and Boras have already talked to the Yankees about coming back. They've talked to the Mets about possibly going over there, and everyone has speculated that Soto could ask for even more money than what Ohtani got in his offseason. Let me clarify, I don't even believe Ohtani is worth $700 million or 10 years of commitment, and he can pitch like a Cy Young. Soto is, of course, a fantastic hitter, plate discipline arguably among the best the league has ever seen. I mean, he gets mentioned stats-wise with guys like Barry Bonds and Ted Williams right now. That's absurd, but not a pitcher. Blake Snell, the Giants starter, is always on everybody's radar as soon as the season ends, but he only signed in March of this year. Corbin Burns was involved in a deadline trade this year from the Brewers, the team that drafted him, to the Orioles. He was just looking to chase a championship, and, welp, that did not happen. So he could look for another short-term mercenary-type deal too, 1 to 2 years with obviously pretty good compensation. The long and short of all of this, I don't think any huge roster change-ups come before at least the new year across all of baseball. Tarek Skubal is actually under contract with the Tigers for 2 more years, and of course he will be named the Cy Young, most likely unanimous. That's going to be announced on November 14th, but I would just book that already. Skubal should get more money than any other starting pitcher, just flat out. He's going to be one of the best on earth for a long time. It's only going to cost more if the Tigers try and drag this out another year or even beyond that. Skubal's made about $5.5 million in his career so far, and I'm guessing he'll be making, roughly that much per month or so when he finally does get extended, somewhere right in that stratosphere around $30 million a year. That's truly a steal if he puts up multiple years like this one. One other hilarious note on free agency: the 2 teams on the ends of the spectrum are the Tigers and the Mets. New York has literally a dozen players, essentially half of their active roster, that are current free agents, and the Tigers have none. If that doesn't go to show you that getting younger is absolutely necessary sometimes, I don't know what is, but I think the Mets are about to kind of scrap everything that they have. I'm not even sure why they're in on the Juan Soto chase at this point, because how are they going to pull that off and retain anybody else? I guess we'll find out. The Thursday night football game tonight is the Bengals and the Ravens. These offenses will probably have no trouble if the season trends hold. The Ravens are that extremely rare team that's allowed the fewest rushing yards and at the same time allowed the most passing yards. I would imagine that's never happened for a full season in history. But when you average those out, they're the 21st ranked defense overall. It could honestly be worse. Still, Baltimore's 6-3 because they also have the highest scoring offense, third most passing yards, by far lead the league in rushing, and Lamar Jackson is probably going to win his third MVP. They do not follow any known logic in the football world, but they're still really fun to watch. The Bengals are now sort of the Joe Burrow show again. They can't run the ball consistently, and part of that issue stems from losing their top running back, Zach Moss, to a neck injury, most likely for the rest of the year as he's on IR. That said, Chase Brown is a second-year player from Illinois who's averaging 5.5 yards a carry filling in, and he'll almost certainly be the starter the rest of the way, getting a bulk of all the touches. He's another guy that you better have picked up in fantasy because if not, you're too late. I'm pretty sure 20 touchdowns to 4 interceptions through 9 games for Joe Burrow is pretty good, but don't quote me. He's top 5 in almost all the stats that matter, including total completions and attempts. So he's had to drop back and sling it a lot, and he's actually getting sacked a lot less on a rate basis than he has in his career before. Of course, Jamar Chase has been his top target ever since the LSU days. Those guys just have the magic together, and that's never going to change. Chase is, by pretty much any measure, the second best receiver in the league behind Justin Jefferson. The Bengals are pretty much average in everything defensively except they're 25th in scoring defense. Cincy is 4-5 coming into tonight, so if they lose this one in a divisional game, they're put in a situation where they almost have to win out. Maybe they could lose one game the rest of the way and get in, but Joe Burrow is still just special enough to do that. The Ravens don't exactly need to win tonight, to be honest. Like I say, they're 6-3 right now, but I still think they will. When you add it all up, hopefully this is one of the great shootouts of the year. It really seems like it should be. I'm going to guess both go over 400 yards of total offense. The quarterbacks combine for, let's say, 7 total touchdowns. And we're talking about a game in the neighborhood of 34-31 Ravens. And that's all for episode 34 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. You know how it goes. Whatever catches my eye, we'll always ponder. Remember, you can feel free to hit me on my socials if you have an idea for me at any time. Instagram and TikTok at The Voice of Tanner. Connect on LinkedIn, and of course, leave a like, comment, and share. This has been episode 34 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me.
Pointing upfield, lets it fly. RIDICULOUS. Ridiculous.
They're going to have to trade the run for the out to throw over to third. Ball game.
Wow. The fifth year to try and put it away with an ace. That's a storybook ending.